So this topic is also important for people interested in Quranic studies or ulum al-Quran, because what we're going to talk about is how does the Quran establish the truth of Islam? And what does a Quranic epistemology look like? And does the Quran address atheism? I remember, many years ago, hearing a popular Muslim preacher. He was asked a question, does the Quran address atheism? And he said, no, it's not an important topic. The Quran doesn't address it, which is actually not true. The Quran addresses it, but it doesn't address it superficially. It doesn't address merely the symptoms, but it addresses the underlying etiology or the underlying diagnosis that contributes to those symptoms, which is radical skepticism. So as we're going to see in the presentation, the Quran addresses it not superficially, but substantively. So this highlights kind of the relevance of the topic, and just to further emphasize the overall thesis. So this is right from the start of the article itself. At the beginning of the article, I mentioned the essential idea at the core of this essay is the following: philosophical proof is not required in order to believe in God, nor to justify one's belief in God. That doesn't mean that people are not to be persuaded by some sort of explanation or justification. The justification offered must primarily focus on Islam's message regarding the purpose and meaning of life. So that's the thesis, right? So it was interesting to see how people misunderstood that or glossed over that important point, where the question is not, is it fitra versus rationality, for example? You are providing a rational explanation, but that rational explanation is grounded in the fitra, and we'll explain how that works as well. So one of the other things that's mentioned at the outset of the article is that people can entertain doubts about all sorts of things. Just as a person does not need philosophical proof to rescue them from the idea that the physical world does not exist, which is the idea of solipsism that we mentioned, or from the idea that moral values do not exist, and this is an idea that philosophers have talked about, moral abolitionism. Good and bad. We don't have any sensory evidence. We can't see good and bad. We can't hear it. We have no physical detection of it. Why do we believe in these things? The philosopher Richard Gardner wrote an article saying that fellow atheists should abandon belief in morality just as they abandon belief in God's existence. So this idea, that moral values do not exist, or that the physical world does not exist. These are examples of radical skepticism. And just as we don't need to demonstrate the logical impossibility of these views through some type of philosophical proof, in the same way, we don't need philosophical proof to escape atheism. There is a fallacy then, or an error in reasoning, in thinking that we must necessarily doubt and demand proof for something before it can be established as veritable truth. So here I want to Yes, go ahead.
Just interject there. It's slightly off subject, but it occurred to me when I was reading your article, my first reading of it, that you're attacking the theoretical basis or the philosophical assumptions of radical skepticism and atheism, and that's very good and valid. But it might be that, I've read psychological studies that show for a large proportion of atheists that their disbelief in God is due to being angry with God or some kind of traumatic event that has made them doubt the existence of God. So it could be, even a divorce, they've lost a job, they're just angry with God. And the opposite, many people have said, and I think it's true, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. Mm-hmm. When you're so angry with God, the worst thing you can do in this kind of emotive state is to obliterate his existence from your mind. But the hatred is still there for many atheists. And I've noticed this when we often speak to atheists, they are really very psychologically engaged in refuting God all the time. They're not dispassionate. They're very much emotionally engaged. And that might betray some kind of psychological event in their own past, which has led them into disbelief. And the issue here, although I'm with you on the theoretical level, it's not for a lot of people a theoretical issue. It is a heart issue. Their heart has shut down or become hard, and the solution is spiritual therapy, really, or God's grace, actually, to be a better way of putting it. Do you see what I mean? So I think,
absolutely. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because what that highlights is that, people appeal to certain justifications to back up their atheism. But when you examine those theoretically and you see that they're all kind of founded on radical skepticism, you're able to see that these justifications don't hold up. Then you sweep those away and you say, well, what's really the issue here? What's really motivating this kind of disbelief? And it could be for someone indifference. The Quran calls that ghafla, right? Heedlessness. A person is just kind of immersed in gratification of desires. The entertainment industry is a massive industry in society, right? That just keeps people in a perpetual state of heedlessness, so that the even thoughts of spiritual purification or moral prosperity or pursuing truth or pursuing the divine don't even arise in the mind, because a person is so constantly bombarded with distractions. And then it also could be, as you mentioned, it could be people are traumatized by their religious upbringing. So there's a really great discussion by the Toronto psychologist John Vervaeke, called "Awakening from the Meaning Crisis," and he has a podcast series where he talks about how there is this contemporary meaning crisis amongst people today. A massive rise in a variety of mental health disorders associated with this meaning crisis, where people are searching for answers, trying to understand what makes my life worth living, what is the purpose of life, and they're not finding answers. And he says, well, traditionally these answers come through religion. These are meta meaning systems, or meta systems of meaning, and we can't get those answers now because many of us are traumatized by our religious upbringing. So we have to try to create a new system, which is a religion of no religion, right? So people are recognizing that there are these factors that have pushed people into disbelief. And you mentioned also the hatred of God. That's an interesting one, because there's the term for that, misotheism, is very, very interesting. We see that there has been a cultural shift actually just in the past 10 years. So we had, in the previous decade, we had new atheism rise and then just suddenly fall, right? So new atheism, they had their annual conferences or massive conferences in Australia. The second one that they tried to organize, they had to cancel it due to lack of registration. People just weren't interested in showing up.
And one of the very prominent atheists, I forget her name, she recently converted to Christianity as well. And there was that debate between her and Richard Dawkins, who was aghast that she had betrayed the atheist cause and embraced God.
And so one by one, we see many people who have kind of distanced themselves from the new atheist movement and realize that it's a lot of pent up frustration against maybe their own religious baggage that they were exposed to, but it's not providing them with any meaningful understanding of the answers to life. It's not providing them with any solutions. It's not giving them a coherent epistemology to avoid radical skepticism, for example. And so because it doesn't provide any solutions, people end up drifting away from it. Yeah. There's another reason why there's been a shift from atheism to misotheism, though, which is that there's also been this shift between liberalism to postmodernism. So under liberalism, the idea is that rationality is going to determine what is the truth, and therefore it makes sense to have a debate between a theist and an atheist. But now with postmodernism, truth is relative. There is no objective truth. There is no universal truth. There is no grand narrative.
Although I must insist that everyone now points out, to say that there is no ultimate truth is a statement about ultimate truth. It's a
exactly
a self-refuting claim. You can't say this is the truth, but there is no truth.
Right.
It's an elementary absurdity. You can't have it both. You can't have your cake and eat it.
And all of these ideologies, as we'll see, are inconsistent and self-refuting in many ways. But with postmodernism, it no longer made sense for somebody to be a passionate atheist. So what happens is instead people just start to say, well, I just don't like the idea of God, right? That the idea of misotheism became more popular. And you actually see it and presented in popular culture, in movies, television shows, the idea of, why are you going to let a religion dictate how you live your life? Or why do you have to listen to God? Who is he to tell you how to live your life? These kind of ideas end up being promoted, right? So it's no longer a question of truth. It's just a question of, indifference or apathy or hatred, right? So coming back to the question of radical skepticism, we mentioned that the presumed justification for people's atheism is that there isn't this kind of proof, and therefore, people say we should deny the existence of God. And we're going to show how that's linked to radical skepticism. But one of the things that I want to do is take that back a little bit and show how there is a faulty epistemology underlying that. This idea, which Muslim scholarship encountered in the form of Aristotelian Avicennian epistemology, the idea that all of knowledge is either tasawwur, which is concepts, or tasdiq, which are assents or affirmations or assertions. And the only way to have knowledge of assertions is to have a syllogism. Of course, there are, a syllogism, by the way, is a logical deductive argument. So there are, of course, other ways of getting those assertions. People might point to mass transmission of knowledge, or reliable testimony, or sensory data. But when we're talking about belief in the existence of God, basically people are talking about just logical deductive arguments. So then you have this idea that the existence of God must be proven via syllogism, and any counter arguments need to be addressed, or when certainty is tentative. What do I mean by this? Alvin Plantinga wrote in one of his works that it seems absurd that a person should take this evidentialist approach, where they assume that you have to settle these philosophical debates in order to have a belief in the existence of God, because it's basically suggesting that, every time he said Anthony Flew, who at that time was an atheist, Anthony Flew comes out with a new book, I have to read that book to know what are his counter arguments to my arguments, or else I can't have certainty in my own faith. Or, for example, somebody saying, well, you can't really know whether God exists until you read all of William Lane Craig's discussions on cosmological proof for the existence of God. And then you have to read Graham Opie's books refuting those arguments, and you have to keep going back and forth. And if you don't do that, your faith is still tentative, because you haven't fully proven or worked out the logical impossibility of the counterfactual, right? So this is the faulty epistemology. And by the way, this doesn't apply to any other aspect of human knowledge. Like, people understand for any other aspect of human knowledge, it would be irrational, frankly, to try to proceed in this manner. You couldn't have knowledge of anything. And therefore, that approach, in this case, it leads to atheism. But if you were to try to apply this broadly, it would just be radical skepticism. It would entail radical skepticism if you tried to apply the same methodology. Anytime you encounter somebody who has a disagreement with you on any issue, you now have to doubt your belief, demand proof for your own belief, and then if they have an argument, you have to have a counter argument to their argument, and then keep going back and forth until it's completely settled. So that's where a lot of the confusion comes in.
So you're saying there's like a selective skepticism about
yes,
fundamental domains of reality, most of which we just accept without having to demonstrate proofs and syllogisms and so on and so forth. They are axiomatic. But in certain domains, the domain of the religious epistemology, suddenly this extremely high level of proof and evidence and argument is required. And you're saying this is an inconsistent methodology, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And people do this in whatever topic that they have a personal bias towards, right? So I'm going to accept whatever information, comes from this source because I like it. But if for example, if somebody is a anti-COVID, anti-vaxxer, or conspiracy theorist, then I will apply radical skepticism to everything that comes about science, right? Or if somebody's talking about the genocide in Gaza and they'll say, well, we can't trust the numbers. No, we'll apply radical skepticism there. Right, but you flip the standards and you talk about any other element, and you see like what's going on here. Sometimes you accept certain sources unquestioningly, and other times if it disagrees with something you like, or it disagrees with your own political interests, you apply this radical skepticism. So people are selective and inconsistent in their radical skepticism in many domains.
Right.
So now we want to come to the Quranic epistemology. So we discussed a little bit about the problematic epistemology, which is radical skepticism. So let's come to the Quranic epistemology of religious belief, and let's actually try to understand, how does the Quran teach us that the truth is to be pursued, and is the problem an insufficient amount of evidence, or is it a moral failure to pursue the truth? Mm-hmm. So as I mentioned before, What the Quran does is it addresses the underlying psychological and epistemological phenomena which precipitate disbelief, right? So it doesn't address things superficially, it addresses the underlying psychological and epistemological realities that are causing people to have these notions of disbelief. So for example, when the atheist says, prove to me God exists, people right away jump to trying to answer the question, well, here's a proof, but they're not correcting the underlying epistemological failure, the problematic mindset. And one of the ways they could correct that is by saying, well, what would you accept as proof? Right? Yeah. What would you accept as proof? And I actually remember many, many years ago seeing a debate where an atheist said, prove to me God exists. And the theist said, well, what would you accept as proof for God's existence? And the atheist, thought about it for a moment and he said, well, I would only believe in God if I saw him directly. Which is a very interesting kind of response because that's something the Quran mentions, right? The people of Bani Israel said to Prophet Musa, وَقَالُوا لَن نُؤْمِنَ لَكَ حَتَّى نَرَى اللَّهَ جَهْرًا. We're not going to believe in you until we see Allah directly, right? Mm-hmm. So he said that, and the theist said, okay, so you're telling me if you actually saw God directly, then you would believe and you would abandon your atheism. And he thought about it for a moment. He said, well, actually, I would probably say that I'm just having a bad hangover, which is very interesting again, because the Quran mentions in Surah Al-Hijr, the 15th chapter of the Quran, even if we open to them a gate from the heavens and they continue to ascend therein, they would simply say our eyes have only been dazzled. Rather, we are a people affected by magic. وَلَوْ فَتَحْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ بَابًا مِّنَ السَّمَاءِ فَظَلُّوا فِيهِ يَعْرُجُونَ لَقَالُوا إِنَّمَا سُكِّرَتْ أَبْصَارُنَا بَلْ نَحْنُ قَوْمٌ مَسْحُورُونَ. So this is an interesting point where the Quran is highlighting the attitude of radical skepticism. Even if you saw the most incredible proof, you see the gates of heavens open up and you ascend up into them, or in another interpretation, another tafsir, you see the angels ascending up into the heavens, you're still going to say we're hallucinating, right? This is just a spell. So what is the problem? Is the problem that you haven't seen sufficient proof, or is the problem the underlying epistemology and mindset?
And can I add also, you say the atheist says, prove to me God exists, and indeed that's what they usually say. And I've noticed this is an opening strategy, because to basically set the burden of proof for the argument. And it's unless you're alert to that strategy, that you're easily going to fall into them, the atheists, setting the terms of the debate. Well, one could equally say atheism is a metaphysical truth claim. It's a claim that the universe has no creator. What is your evidence for that claim? But please substantiate your claim with evidence and proof. And I've done that. I've jumped in straight away. And they immediately balk at that. Oh, no. I want you to tell me, prove to me that God exists. No, I'm sorry. Hang on. You're making an actual positive truth claim about reality, a philosophical claim. You don't get a free pass because you call yourself an atheist. Every philosophical position has, ideally, to justify itself. So how do you justify atheism? So there's a whole burden of proof argument. So I find that if you jump in at that beginning stage, you never get to the question, prove to me God exists, because you're arguing over who sets the terms of the debate, where the goalposts, everything else, and they don't like that at all. But it's a very common trick that they just jump in and put the theist on the spot.
Yes, exactly. The whole idea is putting the theist on the defensive, and that approach is actually built on an underlying fallacy. And if that fallacy is not questioned, we're just going to be going round and round in circles without actually dealing with the underlying issue. So if we look further at what the Quran says about the epistemology of religious belief, I mentioned this verse in Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2, verse 55, where they said, "Oh Moses, we will never believe you until we see Allah with our own eyes." Similarly, in Surah Furqan, chapter 25, verse 21, they say, those who do not believe that they are destined to meet us say, why have no angels been sent down to us? Oh, nara rabbana, or why do we not see our Lord directly? Indeed, they are far too proud of themselves, having rebelled against God's truth with utter disdain. So the Quran identifies that it is fundamentally a moral failure that leads to these bizarre demands, and the problem is actually the mindset rather than insufficient evidence. And there's, of course, a variety of passages in the Quran which mention why isn't a sign sent down, which, corresponds to this attitude of why can't I see the proof? And so, in Surah Al-Ankabut, the 29th chapter, it mentions, yet they say, why have no signs been bestowed upon him from his Lord? Say, the signs are with God, and as for me, I am but a plain warner. Now, I also want to take the opportunity to mention there is this book that has been written in Arabic, Al-Iman Fitra, which is a work by Dr. Umar Farouk Abdullah, American convert to Islam, interestingly written in Arabic, and there isn't an English translation, so that is only in Arabic, but it is a very comprehensive study of all of the verses of the Quran and Hadith and statements of scholars related to the topic of the Fitra, and so it's a very useful resource for people to check out as well if you are able to read the Arabic. So now moving forward, again looking at other examples from the Quran of the epistemology of religious belief, we find examples where there are certain demands for proof that are made, or the Quran mentions that even if a certain type of proof was shown to them, they still wouldn't accept it. So, for example, the Quran mentions if we had sent down a written message on parchment so they could touch it with their hands, the disbelievers would have been sure to say, this is nothing but obvious magic. In Surah Al-Isra, the 17th chapter, one of the things that's mentioned is the Quraysh came to the Prophet and they said, make rivers and gardens sprout up, all around us, springs come out of the earth, why don't you have a house made out of gold? Why don't you have a book that comes down from heaven? They came up with all these kind of demands. And the Prophet is told to say, Subhana Rabbi, hal kuntu illa basharar rasula. Glory be to my Lord. Am I not a human being who's a messenger? In other words, the focus is on the message. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, I should say, did have physical miracles, but these verses show us that the miracles are not required for people to have faith, and people will make demands for miracles as a result of their own radical skepticism. And so, looking at what the Quran mentions and what Allah says in the Quran in Surah Yusuf, chapter 12, verse 105, how many a sign is there in the heavens and on earth which they pass by unthinkingly and on which they turn their backs. وَكَأَيٍّ مِّنْ آيَةٍ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ يَمُرُّونَ عَلَيْهَا وَهُمْ عَنْهَا مُعْرِضُونَ. They just turn away from them. So that's the crux of the issue there. The signs are there. But how do you recognize the signs, understand their meaning, identify them appropriately, understand their significance? That requires having the correct epistemology.
It's interesting. Sorry, today the signs that we can observe and have access to are almost infinitely more than at the time of the Prophet himself, or even the centuries after that. Because we have telescopes, we have microscopes, we see cells, we see DNA. We see the most extraordinary, exquisite engineering and design in organisms and so on in the universe, which are signs of God's creative power. But so there's a superabundance of signs,
right?
More than ever before, arguably in human history, because of what science is disclosing for us. And yet, many people pass by unthinkingly, as the Quran says.
Right. And I think a great example of this is the series of posts that you've done on #NoDesign, right? Where you show something in, an incredible feature that we see in the natural world, right? Of some microscopic level of detail in some organism. And, people just assume this sprung out of nowhere without the wisdom of the divine. And I think that's one of the examples of just looking and recognizing the signs everywhere. Yeah. And asking, is the alternative meaningful? Is there any other meaningful account of the reality of existence besides this? And Surah Al-Ra'd, the 13th chapter, mentions, again, the demand, why has no sign been sent down? And what's interesting about this verse is it punctuates it by mentioning وَيَهْدِي إِلَيْهِ مَنْ أَنَابَ, that God guides those who turn to him. So there is a spiritual inclination that is required for a person to actually attain appropriate epistemology, to actually attain the truth. There has to be a sincere desire. And that's kind of what we see in everything, right? When it comes to the genocide in Gaza, a person at the end of the day may spend hours and hours debating with somebody from the opposite side and then say, well, at the end of the day, if a person does not wish to change their outlook, dehumanization of Palestinians, or their outlook of support for apartheid or whatever, if a person does not want to change that outlook, at the end of the day, you can only do so much. There has to be a willingness on a person's part. And in the same way, it applies spiritually as well.